picture of countries which are, in many ways, see EU moving away from them. And as a result, elites are less and less committed about EU enlargement. You get more and more sound bites, more and more signals saying that they're not that interested in enlargement anymore. And you have a kind of a rise of authoritarianism, not dictatorship, but just governments which behave not very democratic, which reduce media freedoms, and that really becomes a problem increasingly.
Some of us dealing with, for example, Macedonia for a long time are a bit in love with this country, and they want to see it closer to the EU than the reality shows what is possible. And they make the mistake not to mention, not to name the real problems, and also to go in fight with the government if necessary, because I think we help them only if we really name the problems and say what we see, and not what we feel and what we hope.
I think in the region we have tried several times, maybe one time too many, with strong leaders. I think what we really need in the Balkans is strong institutions.
I think the conference was a success, and I would like to underline what Mr. Fleckenstein said. This Berlin conference, since it took place in Berlin, is another proof that the federal government under Chancellor Angela Merkel and her foreign minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier have identified the Balkans as a very important region, not only for European but also for national German foreign policy. And despite all the troubles we have in our southern neighborhood, and despite all the troubles we have in our eastern neighborhood, we must always bear in mind that the Balkans are in the heart of Europe, and that it's not only in the interest of the Balkan countries, but it's in the interest of all of us in Europe that the process of reconciliation and cooperation goes on. And that's why I'm very happy that the next conference will take place in Vienna, and that we can have a new impetus which can now be carried on. I think this shows that the Balkans are not only of interest south of the Alp Mountains, but also north.
First, it's good that the European Union is actually thinking about Western Balkans, if nothing else, in terms of money, if nothing else. But that's not enough. The capacities of the Western Balkan countries to actually deal and cope with this kind of calamity, if you will, are limited, as we all know. That's the first point. The second point is regarding Mr. Orban. I completely agree. The lack of European leadership actually pushed these countries to actually resort to different kind of things. But that does not sanction Hungary and Mr. Orban from being what he is at the moment. Hungary is doing things like that are unspeakable in European terms. And the biggest problem at the moment is not will he come or will he not come? The biggest problem that the European Union is facing at the moment is to actually demystify, and you can do it right away, who these people are, refugees. They're not terrorists.
We should not let that go if the pictures are gone. Secondly, I have to say it is not only the Hungarian president who failed miserably the European values, because the whole, and there was unity actually, unity in the European Union, that our external borders are being completely blocked. The fortress Europe was really closed before 2011, if we look to the Mediterranean. And instead of analyzing in a logical way that the wars who began in the Arab world and the transformation processes in our neighborhood led to many refugees and misery, we did not change the policy, altogether not. And what we had let's say half a year ago, the border of the European Union was the most deadly border in the world.
To our core values of the European Union, then human lives should be first. Then saving refugees should be first. Then providing legal access for refugees should be first. And providing an organized way, a common European asylum system, a common European migration system that really deserves its name. We don't have that. We have, as Tonino Pizzula said, we have elections all over the place, and I personally, not just personally, but also politically, I feel, and I have said that publicly as well, that this package deal that was done with Turkey by European Union leaders was a totally undeserved election present for Erdogan. This is something that shouldn't have happened. That you cannot do something like that 2 weeks before elections, especially when we see that Erdogan over the last weeks and months and his people have been starting to wage a war, not against Daesh and IS, but also and mostly against the Kurds, against PKK, but also against the elected opposition of HDP. And this sort of undeserved electoral presence is something that I find very problematic, extremely problematic. And it seems like the European Union leaders, some of them just want Turkey now to keep refugees off our backs. This is not what European Union policies should be doing. I find it extremely problematic that now, in times when some of those who until now didn't want to open any more chapters with Turkey, from my political group, from the Greens, we have been in favor of that in order to strengthen the European-minded people in Turkey, but also for visa liberalization. Now suddenly, even those who before, especially from the European conservatives, who were totally against that, now finally they want it, just because they want Turkey to keep refugees off our backs. This is not a policy that I would want the European Union to do. It is happening right now. But the problems we have is lack of political will and political courage, and lack of structures in the European Union. Having member states who are not willing to take some refugees, to have a good distribution of refugees all over our 500 million European Union.
President Račan came to the government with us all together. We start really to openly work with the civil society. I will not say that it was perfect, that everything was perfect. Of course, we had also problems. But on the end of the day, I can say that especially in some areas in Croatia, let me say in my area where I live and where I later was the president of the region of Istria, we can say that really the human rights are on a very, very high level. Minority rights, LGBT rights, all type of human rights, we can say really are on a very high level.
Definitely, I think they do understand, but it's a process. It's a continuum. It's an evolving process. I'm very convinced, and reactions we received after Vienna showed us that we have moved 2 or 3 steps forward during that meeting or with that meeting, because really for the first time members of governments from the Western Balkan countries and NGO representatives, civil society representatives sat side by side in a panel discussion that was televised, that was broadcast, that was recorded. So what they were saying, what the NGOs were saying, is on record, and one can build on that. And this is, I think, a big achievement, even if some were not too happy because the politicians had more time than the civil society representatives. The politicians were making general policy statements rather than
concrete
speaking to the very specific points that the NGOs were making.
Think about the civil society in the Balkans. We have to think about the situation in the past. So in the 1990s, we were facing with a unified bloc of civil society fighting the war, nationalism, autocratic regimes, and for us it was really easy to decide with whom we want to work and which processes do we want to support. Now situation is very different. Now we have organizations very active, very present on the ground, that maybe we don't really want them to be there, but they are there, like right-wing organizations. They reach very well to the grassroots levels, to the citizens, to general population. Then we have, talking about the EU context, we have civil society organizations very active that are maybe not about the EU. They're not going around in their activities waving the blue flag with yellow stars, but they're doing a really good job.
Because how can we preach to those who want to join the European Union about media freedom, about democratic values, if there are countries within the European Union who are not respecting those values? So by doing that, they are weakening the European Union's power of transforming societies that want to join, like the Balkan countries, who are some of them negotiating, others waiting to join, and who are facing some very serious democratic problems.
Now, the smuggling issue, it's a symptom of the current situation. Now, you don't solve the symptom by putting up another symptom which is a barbed wire fence. You actually move to see how to get safe routes to Europe, how to make sure the reception centers, both within Europe and on the other side, are well funded, that have enough finances going to them, that there are employment opportunities in those countries, in the frontline states. So I think it's wrong every time we bring it back to borders, because borders are just a symptom of what we're talking about. It's much bigger, and it requires surge funding from the EU to actually deal with this way before you get to the border situation.